So Cade grew up on Gunnersville Lake in North Alabama. After earning his BS from Auburn University, he took a position with the SCA, partnering with the U.S. Forest Service as a wilderness restoration intern in Washington. However, Sweet Home Alabama called and Cade returned to work on his MS at Auburn University. He has completed all coursework and will receive his MS upon completion of his thesis. After getting married, he followed his wife to her home in Baldwin County and has been exploring the treasures of the Gulf Coast since. As program director, Cade works to make sure that projects Mobile Baykeeper engages in fit the vision and strategic plan of the organization. He is responsible for determining how and when to engage in policy matters to ensure responsible growth throughout the area. Cade manages Mobile Baykeeper's activities in protecting our waterways and communities from pollution resulting from infrastructure issues such as sewage overflows, construction stormwater, which he's going to be talking about today, and industrial pollution. And in his spare time, Cade likes to kayak and bike with his wife and snow ski whenever he can. Awesome. You can go ahead and start, Cade.
Perfect. Thanks, Carrie. I mentioned in Carrie read in my bio, I did get to do the SCA thing for a little while after I got out of college. It was a really awesome experience that I enjoyed. I got as many good life experiences and friends from it as professional development and some of us, so it was cool. So I completely relate to what you guys are going through, and yeah. So switching gears a little bit to construction stormwater, I'm going to talk through this program we have called Muddy Water Watch, which basically gives citizens the tools to think about how to deal with construction stormwater pollution, to understand when something isn't right and what you can do about it. And I'm going to talk just a little bit about responsible growth too, because that's a big factor in construction stormwater, especially here on the Gulf Coast. And anytime if y'all can't hear me or something, my mic goes out, just start waving your hands and I'll keep going, not pay attention. All right. So I just real briefly, if y'all aren't familiar with Mobile Baykeeper, we're an environmental nonprofit, been around for about 23 years now, formed by a group of citizens fighting pollution on the western shore of Mobile Bay. And we work really hard to be three major things, like in terms of who we are. That's an environmental watchdog, making sure we're stopping pollution, looking into enforcement of permits, regulations, and that everybody's doing what they need to protect our waterways, follow the law, so we can all swim, fish, drink clean water, and play for a long time to come. We work really hard to be an informed voice of reason. So before we take a stance on an issue, before we point a finger from this environmental watchdog stance, we're doing in-depth research to get a full understanding of the issue. And then we always try to collaborate for solutions. So that means that our first step is not to file a lawsuit. In fact, that's our very last step. In case there's no other recourse we can take, we always want to find a way to work together with a group, an organization, business, individual to fix a problem if we can. And we do three major things here. We do a lot of education and engagement. That's the fun part of the work. Get to raise awareness about key issues and educate adults and students, and go out and do litter cleanups, apple snail roundups. We have a program called SWAMP, which is a strategic watershed awareness and monitoring program. That's kind of our number one in terms of reach educational program. We work with a bunch of high schools around the area, Viger, LaFleur, Citronelle, Murphy. We've previously worked with Fairhope, with Alma Bryant, and some of those are newer. So if you guys are grads from one of those schools, you're like, well, I didn't get to do that. We're sorry, but maybe if you have some younger siblings, they'll get an opportunity. We work a lot to resolve environmental issues. That's kind of going to be the focus of today, right? You see over here in this picture in the middle of the screen, construction stormwater pouring into Mobile Bay from some pollution going on where they were building a strip mall in Daphne. So we try to stop that. That's a drone picture we took, working on that issue, investigating that issue, and then working a lot to ensure responsible growth, right? Because we're not anti-growth. We want a strong economy. We want people to have jobs, but we want it done in a way that also protects the Gulf Coast and doesn't sacrifice our future and our natural resources for short-term growth. We want to see it done responsibly. So that's kind of what we do. All right, so I'm going to just talk through a couple slides about responsible, or in this case, irresponsible growth. And that's kind of the crux of this whole construction stormwater thing. And then we'll talk a little bit more about what construction stormwater is and why Muddy While muddy water is a problem, right? So without thinking about like what the consequences were over a long period of time, we've inflicted a lot of damage on the Gulf Coast. And so that looks like in the US, over the last several hundred years, we've lost 104 million acres of wetlands, and that's like 60 acres an hour for 200 years, which blew my mind when I figured that out. I'm thinking about, how many, reading some different studies and thinking about, well, what does that come out to? And of course, the majority of that was early on, a whole lot less since the 1970s and the Clean Water Act, but it still just tells you this vast amount of natural resources that have been sacrificed to let our communities grow. And down here, I've got a picture. This is actually locally sourced, right? So this is like if you look one way across this road, the picture on the left is what you see. And then they got this wetland fill permit to build this small industrial facility on the south side of the road. So if you just turn around 180 degrees, like right behind you is the picture on the right-hand side of the screen. It used to look basically exactly like this wetland, and now it's been filled in. Now it's a nice flat spot right for development. And I'll talk a little bit about why wetlands are important too. So zooming in, right, and this is kind of the same deal. Since 1955, the Mobile Bay area has lost 50,000 acres of wetlands. That's about 12 acres a day. And again, the majority of that early on, but it still just tells you how much natural resource has been lost. And y'all probably know a lot of this, but wetlands are vitally important for our environment, right? They protect against flooding and storm surge. When there's pollution from different things like sewage spills or stormwater runoff from cars with oil, all kind of things, those wetlands, they act like natural kidneys, right? They filter out the pollution, they absorb it into those soils, and bacteria, microorganisms, and plants are able to take it up and keep it from just going straight out into the environment. And it's released more slowly in a way that animals and fish and all that can handle a lot better than if it just runs straight off, right? So wetlands are really important for a whole lot of reasons, both economic, like we don't want our neighborhoods and businesses to flood or get devastated by storm surge, and those wetlands can hold that water, but also environmental, right? So here's a map. This is from a study the National X-ray Program had done. I can send y'all that if you're really interested in some late night reading to help you get to sleep. But you can just see, I think the green is emergent wetlands, which means, like wetlands that are a little bit more coming out of the water, a little bit more like down on the marshes and the bays and the rivers. And then the red, I think, is pollution wetlands, which is like forested wetlands. And you could see the red especially taking a huge hit. And you can just see all around, what's that, Cade and Grand Bay, Theodore, and around Mobile, just tons of forested wetlands being eaten up for all strip malls and Dollar Generals and houses and everything else. So then that moves us forward to present day. And of course, there's a lot of growth in Mobile County. There's even more in Baldwin County. And you see some headlines that I pulled from AL.com and elsewhere about growth in Baldwin County. You look at the potential for some of these Baldwin County cities to be the fastest growing city over the next 20 plus years, and move to being the fourth largest county in the state, right? So there's this huge, almost 120,000 person increase that they're expecting in 20 years in Baldwin County. And you see this, if you're over here, or if you come over here much, you see this growth going on just unabated. It's like a Wild West. And again, we're not anti-growth. It's a matter of doing it right. This is the important piece. But usually when there's things going on really, really fast, there's a little bit of sloppy work done. So what is stormwater? Well, stormwater runoff is all the rainwater that flows off the ground into receiving waters, lakes, streams, creeks, bays, wetlands. And typically, I'm going to show a different slide in a second. A lot of that water goes down into the soil, especially if we have wetlands, but always, anywhere where you got grass, got a little yard outside my window here, the rainwater is able to infiltrate down into the soil. But where you have impervious surfaces, like driveways and roofs, parking lots, sidewalks, and streets, that water can't soak in, right? It's just forced straight off into the nearest storm drain. And y'all know storm drains, hopefully y'all know they don't go to the wastewater treatment plant. They go straight to the closest stream, river, bay, lake, right? They have a concrete pipe taking them straight to the closest waterway. And again, that just the point at the bottom, wastewater is treated, stormwater is not cleaned. Right, so you can just see this kind of before and after here. You got a natural area, you get some rainwater, it goes down to the ground, a little bit might flow off into the closest lake and stream. It seeps from the ground. It slowly works its way over into the rivers and creeks. You put down a house and some roadway and sidewalk and things like that, and a fair amount of it doesn't go down into the ground. You have a whole lot. See this bigger arrow over here for surface runoff, indicating that a whole lot more of that water is rushing straight off, carrying whatever pollutants it might be carrying, including mud, as well as a lot of heat, which there's a whole big deal about temperature pollution. And this is fairly mild compared to what you might see in some really urbanized areas in terms of how much impervious surface. So kind of zooming in a bit more on construction stormwater, these are some images I've taken in different places over the last several years of major impacts from construction stormwater. And so you can see kind of, this is a stormwater pipe running under a roadway, and it's filled up with mud, right? So you're gonna have major issues there with potential for flooding, also potential economic costs, right? Some contractor didn't follow the law, which I'll talk about a little bit more, let a literal tons of mud run off their site. And now if that stormwater pipe needs replacing, we've all got to pay for it as taxpayers. So they saved a little bit of money by not buying a silt fence. Now we all bear the brunt of that, right? Same thing here, this bridge, this little creek, like a 6 foot wide creek that's just completely silted in. And then you can see this roadway in this neighborhood, and this is all just going to eventually wash off down into creeks and streams nearby, and these are stormwater inlets. We'll talk a bit more about that too. So what are some of the solutions? Well, I had a professor at Auburn, Eve Brantley, if any of y'all get a chance to meet her in some shape, form, or fashion, she's pretty awesome, and she would often say vegetation is the answer, right? So I know y'all do a lot of different things probably related to that, and vegetation is often the best way to solve a lot of these problems. And so you can see here these planters where they've got the stormwater, rather than funneling it straight into a pipe and straight out into a creek, which is an engineering solution, and works well to prevent flooding to an extent. These planters have these engineered beds under them, right? So they've got it where it will drain. They put some gravel down here, and they've even got an under drain, a little pipe under here that makes sure the water moves if you get a catastrophic amount of rain. But now instead of the water just going straight into that river, carrying heat, carrying oil from the roadway, carrying everything else, now it filters into this nice bed, which is also beautiful to look at. Your community is more aesthetically pleasing, has less potential for pollution and ruining your favorite spot to fish, and it also doesn't flood. So there are some great solutions. All right, so that was a little bit of an intro as to why this is important, but now talking a little bit about this Muddy Water Watch program. This is basically like a volunteer training we do that gets people educated to know when construction stormwater specific. So there's a ton of stormwater issues, right? They range from urban stormwater, which might be things that run off from parking lots and houses. There can be just plain erosion from having real high velocity, but construction stormwater specifically related to mud and a few other things flowing off construction sites when they don't follow the Clean Water Act. So we train people to know when that's an issue, how to report it, how to deal with it. And I've got a bunch of slides here, so I'm going to kind of fast forward through a few of them as we get to and get a little in depth. And I can say I don't want to kill y'all and put y'all to sleep. So if you see one that's really interesting and I say that one's not too important, you can yell out, and I'll try to make sure I actually talk about it. But basically, the state agency that deals with this, ADEM, the Department of Environmental Management in Alabama, doesn't have a ton of resources to deal with it. They've got pretty much one person in Mobile County and one person in Baldwin County that does these construction stormwater inspections. They can mobilize a few more people sometimes, but that's typically how it works. And then the cities themselves usually have a person on their staff that kind of does this. Sometimes that person in the smaller cities does like 8 different things. They like run the garbage truck, and they also are the mayor and whatever else. But in the bigger cities, there's usually somebody specifically to do this. So like Fairhope and Daphne have somebody that does this. Mobile has several somebodies that deal with this. So there's job opportunities there as well. But a lot of times they're also under-resourced, especially when you think back to that slide I showed that said there's 120,000 people moving to Baldwin County, and Mobile's growing too. And all the homes and parking lots and stores and everything else that goes along with that. There's a lot of construction for one person to be able to see all these sites and make sure they're following the Clean Water Act. So being able to know how to deal with these things, know when they're a problem, and help report them, I guess, makes them be resolved a lot faster, ipso facto cleaner water, right? So here's our cartoon for the day. The guy was telling his kid as he sees this silt fence overtopped with mud flowing down to the river, he said, it's called runoff because that's what the developer does when you try to get him to fix it. Okay, so to be clear, I have friends that are developers. I know good developers, but some really have a hard time following the law. They come through, they clear cut, they build some condos, and they pocket the profit without doing what they need to do. So that's not everybody. Again, that's not everybody, but there are some, and we've seen it prevalently in some cases, and we've worked really hard to get solutions. And I'll tell you about a few solutions. Talk about some basics. We'll talk about what a construction site looks like, how to do an inspection, how to do advocacy. Why is clean water important? I think you guys know by now. It's everything, right? From being able to drink clean water to being able to play, fish, economy. Clean water impacts pretty much every part of your life. Like 53 streams, it may be more. That was 2014. Like 21% of the streams in Alabama are impaired due to basically dirt, mud, clay, silt in those streams, sedimentation. This is a NASA picture of Mobile Bay back in the 70s. You can see the mud flowing down to Mobile Bay through the 5 rivers, which of course drains, a chunk of the state. But you can also see, if you look here, right here, the Eastern Shore's got this special little plume coming in. Does anybody from Baldwin County in the call? Anybody know about where this would be? And everybody's got their mic muted, so I'll pop in here. So we're just south of I-10. Somebody gonna venture a guess?
Isn't it Lake Forest?
Yeah, I think Boris has the advantage of having seen this before, but yeah, that is Lake Forest. You might have known anyway, I don't know, but that's Lake Forest and that mall right there that's being developed in the 70s, and just this plume of mud flowing into the bay. And if you talk to people that have been around Mobile Bay for a long time, they'll tell you about grass beds and oysters. So many grass beds and oysters. It used to be and clear water. But if you go play in the bay today, you won't see many grass beds. You won't see many oysters. And depending on the day, you usually won't see much in the way of clear water. And a big chunk of that is muddy water. And without going into it too far, grass needs light to grow. You put muddy water into the bay, and you end up killing off the grass beds. The roots of those grass beds hold the silt and sediment down. Without the roots there, it just takes a windy day and some waves to get it muddy out there in the bay, right? So now all of a sudden you have this feedback cycle where mud kills off the grass beds. And without the grass beds, windy day makes more mud in the bay. And then oysters do filter mud out, so they actually can help stop that cycle, but they can only make it to a certain extent. Once it gets too muddy, that kills them off too, because they just get suffocated. So you end up with this terrible feedback cycle, what's called a negative feedback cycle, where mud kills off the grass beds and the oysters. The grass beds and the oysters stop mud from being out in the bay, but once they're killed off, the problem continues to get worse. So we're combating this as we stop bad construction practices, and hopefully trending in the right direction. There's some people that know a lot about SAVs, submerged aquatic vegetation, grass beds, that kind of thing, that could tell y'all more about that one day, maybe Judy Hayner or somebody. This harkens back to that slide I showed earlier. Natural condition, whole bunch of water, like 50% goes down to the ground, 10% runs off, some of it goes back in the air. It's magic. Put a big city there, all of a sudden only maybe 15% goes down to the ground, 55% of it goes straight off into the creeks and streams, carrying whatever is on our ground. All right, so why do we really worry about construction sites? Well, they take off the vegetation, there's a bunch of soil exposed, the flow is concentrated, which means it's kind of all funneled to a certain spot, and there's increased impervious surface, roadways and that kind of thing. So this is an 8M photo from the site that was pretty horrendous. You could just see the mud running off. And those activities are a perfect recipe to have more mud flowing off the site. I've already talked about this, but you can see it's 25% change, this 5 to 15% change. So a lot of people moving to Mobile and Baldwin County means a lot of construction. Everybody know what erosion is? I won't beat you over the head with it. Land is worn away and sediment particles are detached, right? That's erosion. And there's 5 types, which I'm not going to go into in depth because it doesn't make a lot of difference for what we're concerned about, except for one thing. All the types except one are pretty much human caused. This is real erosion. This is how it starts. RILL, although it sounds good if we call it real erosion. Gully, when the rills get bigger, they make these established channels called gullies. This is the one that is not usually human caused. We can have these stream bank erosion that can be caused just naturally, right? So there should be some mud in the bay and in the creeks and the rivers naturally, but it shouldn't be the amount that we see after these construction sites come through and pillage. And this can be made worse if we throw that stormwater in there full speed coming from the city, because it scours and erodes those stream banks. So we can see that made worse. And if y'all want to see some amazing restoration, if y'all hadn't already been there, obviously tonight now is a little bit of a tough time, but those streams in Daphne that they've done, especially the one just south of I-10, they've done some really cool. Y'all seen those? I see some fist pumping. They've seen.
Yeah,
y'all get to go
they've gotten to restore some of those sites with the NEP. So.
All right, well, kudos to y'all. Thank you, because those are some impressive sites. I love the team that's worked on that, and y'all are part of that team, so y'all got my love here. So, pretty cool stuff. This is in Fairhope, near Fly Creek. The one on the right is actually in Mobile County, now that I think back. Anyway, sedimentation is when that mud is actually deposited, right? So erosion means rip it off the ground. Sedimentation means it's starting to go back into our creeks and streams and all that kind of stuff. And it can carry a whole bunch of other stuff. So it's not just the mud. It can carry nutrients, lead to dead zones, metals, oils, bad things, bacteria, all kind of fun stuff, right? And so you can see this nice plume in the Magnolia River that Ashley Campbell took. Y'all probably got to meet her if you got to do some stuff up in Daphne. She's cool. Here's a photo of Fly Creek, which usually runs completely clear. Go kayak there sometime when this is all said and done, or if you can get there safely and social distance, go kayak there. But this is how it looked on a day after they were doing some major construction at a development upstream. And just to talk about the impact, right? Because this is the key piece here. It's like, oh, it's just mud, you know, especially in South Alabama, people are like, it's just mud, who cares? I sprayed the water hose on the sand pit as a kid, it's just mud. Well, again, it blocks sunlight from aquatic plants. Small amounts can irritate fish. Large amounts can actually clog their gills and cause them to suffocate, or also cause them not to be able to breed, which means if you like to fish, for all those guys who go, hey, it's just mud, man. If you like to fish, it's a big deal, because it can actually cause the fishing to get a lot worse real quick. Grass beds are habitat, and fish need to be able to breed if you want to fish. It decreases the visibility for fish. A lot of our favorite fish to catch and eat are sight predators, which means they got to see. And if you're in chocolate milkshake, you can't see very far, and it can smother all their food sources. I will say about this picture too, Fly Creek, this section, it used to be like 4.5 feet deep. Diego Arrieta and I did some sampling up in this area, and it's like you can barely paddle a kayak up there, where the worst of this happened. So it went from like 4.5 feet deep to like 6 to 8 inches, depending on the water level. Not a good deal if you bought that property and you're thinking, man, I'm putting that boathouse out there, I'll be getting my John boat out, this property's worth X. And then one day you're like, man, I worked really hard for this property, and now I can't put that boathouse out there because the developer upstream completely silted it in. They saved some money, you lost a bunch. Impacts on humans, right? It can cause property damage. I mentioned that. Like I said, if you work for a career and you buy a tract of property on that favorite creek that you loved, and then somebody develops a 500 unit apartment complex upstream, and your bass boat can't get out anymore, or whatever, your pontoon boat, depending on your enjoyment, can't get out anymore, that's a big deal. I mean, really and truly, I'm kind of making light of it. That's a big deal. Talk about property value. It causes a lot of increase in cost in drinking water treatment. This is a picture going toward Big Creek Lake, which probably for the majority of y'all is your drinking water source. If you're in Mobile, or if you're on the Spanish Fort, Daphne, Eastern Shore area, this costs them a lot of money, which ipso facto, which means that it costs you a lot of money, right? Because if it costs malls money, then you got to pay it on your water bill. So increase in cost, decrease in supply, and it can cause flooding, as well as you just can't paddle your boat, or you can't take your boat out, which is reduce your recreation. Here's the Cahaba. Here's Point Clear Creek. You can see before and after, it's a big difference. This is actually upstream, same watershed downstream of this construction site. All right, so I mentioned earlier the NEP study. If y'all want some late night reading, this is another one. If you need something to help you get to bed at night if you're having trouble sleeping during the pandemic, you know, you can just read the Alabama Handbook for Erosion Control, Sediment Control, and Stormwater Management, and then problem solved. You'll be right to bed. But really and truly, this is like the Bible on erosion control, and there's a lot to learn if you find this interesting, think this might be a career one day that you might be interested in. And there's some really cool opportunities in this field. So here's the thing with stopping construction stormwater. It's all about best management practices. BMPs is what we're going to call them, and the key is 3 things, because usually you only see 1, maybe 2 of these done right. It's got to be designed properly, You got to have somebody that understands flow, water, and hydrology. Look at the site and say, this is where you're going to have problems. This is where you're going to have a chance for erosion. This is where you need to install these BMPs. All right. Then it's got to be installed properly. That one makes sense. You got to put them in right. If you do it lazy, if you do it cheap, if you ever installed anything in your life, you've done it lazy or cheap, then you know how that goes. And then they've got to be maintained. That's the key one that we see most of the time not taken care of, because they're busy building houses or Dollar Generals or whatever else. They want to get it done, because the quicker they get it done, the less staff time. That means the more profit that's in it. And so fixing the silt fence or fixing the wattle or whatever else means that you're not making money, essentially. And so unfortunately for them, or for their profit margins, for those that are irresponsible contractors, that's the law, that you got to be able to protect the downstream water quality. So this Muddy Water Watch training helps us train folks to enforce that, so that we can all have clean water. And there's two types of BMPs, right? One is to stop the soil from being eroded. One's to stop that dirt from being detached, and the other is to actually stop it from flowing downstream. Okay, so number two is the one you see the most of, silt fences. If y'all ever seen a black fence around a construction site, that's number two. It costs a lot of money and it works a lot less effectively. Number one is the best, and typically it has to do with vegetation. And it's a lot easier, but it takes a little more time to thought, right? So here's an example of number one. This stops the soil from being eroded. They put some seed down and they have this erosion control blanket. I think the next slide shows it a little bit better, right? So you see this erosion control blanket on this real steep slope next to a creek. You put this thing down and rainwater comes down, it's not gonna be much soil moving. These things are expensive though, and they do take some time to install, having staked one down before. Mulch can be used, right? So you can put down hay, you can put down pine straw, you put down different types of mulch. Again, the key here is you're trying to keep the soil from actually being eroded in the first place. And I had this class one time about a bunch of this type of stuff, and we did an equation about what's the force of 1 inch of rain falling on 1 acre of soil. And I don't remember the exact number, but it was like tens of thousands of locomotives. It blew my mind. The force of these raindrops hitting the ground is just really, really high. So you want to try to reduce that force a bit and knock that force down, so that you don't end up with as much mud moving around your site. So if you're out and about and you're seeing some mud running off and you go look at the construction site and it looks like this is what a really bad job of mulching looks like, right? Got all the soil covered up? Not so much. Also housekeeping, come on guys. But yeah, this is the kind of thing that you would take note of and be able to report and say, like, they don't have any kind of soil stabilized. This looks really good. This is usually after the fact, because it costs a lot of money to plant grass like that, but that's not gonna have any erosion going on, because that's permanent stabilization. Here's we're all done, but we didn't actually do stabilization, right? So they've got a little grass on the curb cut, but really and truly it's in pretty bad shape, and you're gonna see a bunch of mud leaving that site. So moving on to these structural BMPs, not the vegetated ones. This is a silt fence. Most of y'all probably seen this at some point or another, may not have paid it any attention. This is a pretty good one, right? You can see the big steel T-bars or whatever, the kind of pig wire. It's set to stay, and you can see at the bottom been trenched down to the ground here, because if you ever play with water, you just set it on the ground, you know that water is going to go right under it. Okay. Construction is one thing that's required. When you go in and out of a construction site, it should make you spill your coffee. That's how you know there's enough rock or stone at the exit entrance, and that's to knock mud off the tires of the construction trucks and the dump trucks coming in and out. Sometimes you see pretty good ones. That's an example of a pretty good one. Sometimes you see ones that stand to use some improvement, right? I don't think that's going to spill my coffee. Furthermore, it's definitely already covered up in mud, and it's not going to knock anything off trucks coming in and out of that site, and they're going to put mud in the roadway. So silt fence, I mentioned earlier, this is the most common thing. It's supposed to slow down water coming off the site and cause the sediment to drop out and to filter the sediment out. Again, that's a good one. There's one that was installed really poorly, right? You can see that it wasn't trenched in very well, and the mud is just running under that silt fence. Also not the right type, for what it's worth. Here's a site where you needed a whole bunch more because you're on a steep slope. That erosion control blanket I showed earlier, maybe some mulch, and they've even tried to double up silt fences here, but this was designed to fail from the start. I mean, I don't know that it was intentional, but it wasn't going to work from day one because of the steepness of that slope. So that's a poor job. And this picture, the silt fence is also not doing a very good job. Of course, it's right there. That's the silt fence there, and it won't work because invisible silt fences are known commonly to fail. My wife says I'm corny. I don't know what the deal is with that, but y'all will, I'm sure y'all won't think so. All right, inlet protection. This little green circle right here, green and gray circle, is a stormwater inlet. One day when the neighborhood or whatever this is finished, it'll be the drain in the middle of the driveway or the roadway that water flows into to go into the pipes. But you don't want it filling up with mud before your construction's done for a couple reasons. One is the pipes are probably already connected. You do that first. And so it's going to take that mud and flow it off the site. Two, if you're going to move in there one day, you want them to keep it protected too, because you don't want your stormwater pipes to be backed up the day you move into this nice shiny new neighborhood that looks clean, but under the surface it's got stormwater pipes full of mud, because then it's going to flood from day one. So this is a good inlet protection. They put these little synthetic covers over them, keeps all the mud out, and then when you're done with construction, you pull them off, and voila, you have a nice stormwater drain. This is not good inlet protection, right? All the mud's flowing straight into there. It's going out the pipes. So you got mud going to the creek, but you're also filling it up for the neighborhood before they even move in. So these people don't know this because, you know, as a home buyer, if you've ever been a home buyer, or ever think you will be, is typically not the kind of thing you're looking for. You're not like, let me see the pictures from 10 years ago when you built this neighborhood. Did you have proper inlet protection? Right, there it is. You can also sometimes see eels and wattles, just other ways to stop mud from going into these inlets. This is one that's not doing its job here, but I will tell you that this is really not the problem of design of this wattle, right? Because this is doing about all it can do here. The problem is in the fact that there wasn't enough mulch on the ground, or the silt fences weren't installed properly, because at this point, you shouldn't have this much mud in the water. It should be just a little bit that this wattle's dealing with, because these things should work like in trains, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And the last step in the train is typically a sediment basin. Water flows into here, and it's supposed to make the sediment drop out. So this is what we call a riser pipe. If you guys have ever seen these in neighborhoods and stuff before, essentially until the water gets to a certain height, it can't leave this pond. So what you want is the water comes in, and as it gets slowed down in the pond, mud drops out, and then the water flows out the riser pipe, and just the top level, the cleanest water is flowing out of that pipe. This one's not doing a very good job. Again, this is more a problem of upstream in this neighborhood. They didn't do enough than the sediment basin not doing a good job, although you can tell this is pretty much a disaster. And the last thing you need is outlet protection. These outlets that leave these pipes, they can erode because they have this high velocity of flow that's coming out of the storm drain. So this is pretty good. A bunch of fast water is going to come out of here. You don't want it just tearing up this dirt and sending mud into the creeks. You put some big rip wrap down. Could be a little better, but that's pretty good. This is not so good, right? This thing, first off, is going to be shooting out this way, which is kind of, you know, it's not designed very well, but secondarily, that's not enough rock to catch and slow that flow down. All right, so here's your test. This is a treatment train here. This is a whole bunch of these things we just talked about. I don't know, does anybody want to come off mute and take a swing at naming one thing that you see going on here that's a good thing?
Well, they got some, I forgot what they were called, but the silk, not no main silk fences, but
These are wattles. Yeah, is that what you're talking about?
yeah, those are good.
Yeah, those wattles.
Yeah, down the water.
Absolutely, exactly. All right, so we also see they've got a bunch of vegetative. This is number one again. This is going to keep there from being much mud to flow off the site in the first place. They've got some mulch down and they got some grass down. Am I saying that too?
Yeah, I was going to answer with the mulch because that's what I thought it was.
Exactly. And that's a big deal because that makes everything else, these wattles and silt fences and inlet protection, they don't have to work nearly as hard and fail nearly as quickly because you don't have as much mud being moved around. Hey, maybe you could do a little bit better job. It costs a lot of money to mulch a site, but if you're stopping the mud, then you're doing enough. But so that, you know, you got some mulch and grass down, then the wattles knock a little bit more down, and then, you know, we're moving back upstream. All right, so you stabilize this slope, you got it mulched, you got these wattles. So by the time it gets to this inlet, it's not having to block out literal tons of mud. It's just blocking out a little bit. And I think I've said twice in this presentation, literal tons of mud. I don't know if y'all have noticed in society lately, but everybody says literally. when they don't mean literally, but I do, because I talked about equations in this class we had to do one time. One of them was like, how much mud is lost by an unprotected site? Like just if you cleared an acre of dirt, and 1 inch of rain, it's like 1 ton of mud, and depends on the soil, will be lost from that acre. So we're talking thousands of pounds of mud flowing to creeks, streams, rivers, and eventually the bay and the Gulf when you don't do this right, when you do it improperly. I'm not going to talk in a lot of detail about the permit, except to say each one of these construction sites is bigger than an acre. Like if you're digging a garden in your yard, it's okay. But if each one of these construction sites is larger than an acre, they have a permit from the state that says you must knock the mud down before it leaves your site. Essentially, they have this thing called an NTU. It's how you measure turbidity, muddiness of water. And you can only increase it. Like if the creek coming on your site or coming next to your site's running at 40 NTU, you can only increase it 50. So if it's 95 when it leaves your construction site, you're technically breaking the law. If it's like some of these pictures I've shown, 1,000 plus, then yeah, you're absolutely breaking the law. And this is the kind of situation where we need citizens to take pictures and be able to say, hey, this silt fence is down. Hey, there's no mulch. Hey, this mud is coming off this site and the creek's clear upstream. And then we'll take that and work with ADEM to get it right, or work with the contractor when we can. I've got a picture of that too. There's a bunch of detail about that. Y'all don't necessarily need to know all that. If you want to get interested in permits, there are QCI classes you can take. Thompson Engineer would probably give a discount for nonprofit kind of stuff. They've given us a discount before, and it's an interesting class if you want to geek out on this with me. So what do you do if you see one of these sites and you're like, you know what, I'm curious if they're doing it near your neighborhood, behind the mall, next to your house, whatever. So the first thing is you see something that looks like there's some failing BMPs, or you see this creek that's running muddy. You want to try to get as many details as you can. I can't say how many of these we get. And it's like, well, there's some mud. It's running into a creek out. You know that Dollar General at Westmobile? I'm like, no, ma'am, I do not. What's it near? What road's it on? Yeah, you know, it's real. And sometimes, you know, we figure all this out and it's like a disaster. And it's a big problem. Other times, it's somebody just don't like their neighbor. You know what I mean? So pictures and detail help us a lot and help the state agency a lot, or the city if you're reporting to them. Right, so describe the site and then document any impacts is the big deal. So what do you want to get? Pictures of street signs or landmarks, any permit signage or ownership signage, and any problems, like all the stuff we just talked about. And the most important thing is what I call receiving waters. That means the creek that's catching all this mud. If there's a creek right nearby and it's just running full muddy, you can see the mud coming off. That's the key detail. Right, so all these type of things, they show who's running the site and who's permitted to get that kind of thing, and they help make it easier to figure out who you need to contact if you want to work with them to fix the problem, as well as if you contact the state to say, you know, who's responsible. Street signs, that kind of thing. If you say, well, it's in this 400 unit neighborhood and there's a problem, it's like, where? So having signs of intersections, that kind of thing, make it a lot easier. Pictures of the issues, y'all can see some of the things we talked about in all these pictures. And then, like I said, any impacts to the community, into the creek, this is Point Clear Creek, all those type of things, those are the big deal. And then you can report it to the contractor. You can call and say, hey, you know, I don't know if you know about this, maybe your guys haven't had a chance to go out there, but there's a bunch of mud running to such and such creek near this site, and it says you're the one running it, and I'm just trying to give you a heads up because it looks like it's a problem. And you can also report it to the state or the city that does enforcement. And we use water rangers a lot now, and there's a web page for water rangers, as well as an app, and you can report pollution, and I'll get a report in the office, and we'll go send somebody on the patrol team to take a look and check it out. And then we can follow up, so you'll get like a little dialogue that says, we're investigating it, here's what we found, here's some photos, here's a report, and figure out what actually happens. And we try to recognize contractors who are doing right. Like this was Cumanus Allen, they had some problems at a site. Trying to think, maybe Elliot, one of our AmeriCorps members, saw it and reported it, gave them a call, and they actually voluntarily went above and beyond to fix the problem, which was pretty cool. So we posted on Facebook. That's what this screenshot of a Facebook post, to thank them and say how good of a job they did. So you can follow up, and we can help with that too. Here's some pictures of Muddy Water Watch in action. This is some muddy water leaving a site, flow in. You can see just, I mean, silt fence is never meant to go in a stormwater ditch or in a creek. If you ever see a silt fence in a stormwater ditch or in a creek, you know that contractor is just like jerry rigging or doesn't know what they're doing or something. I don't know, but that's not right. This is quarter mile downstream, and after a report and a conversation, this is what it looked like. Post all that. They still got the silt fence there, which it's not causing any problem necessarily. Just that's not how it works. But they fixed a lot of these problems. They got a construction entrance. I've got another one, but I'm not going to go into this because I think we're already pushing our time. Advocacy. We do a lot. We inspect sites. We lobby for enforcement. We just saw one of these sites. It's the subject of about 15 pictures in here that was a complete disaster. Just got a big fine from the state after like 2 years of work on our end, and a lot. I mean, hundreds of complaints from local citizens who were just aghast at what was going on. Talking to your elected officials about why this is a big deal, staying connected, let's see, performing these inspections. And definitely, like I said, I mean, being ready to write or call or meet with elected officials to tell them that this is a big deal. It's not just mud. It actually causes major impacts to the bay. A lot of thanks to some great funders that have helped make this work possible. So I will shut up and answer any questions, and hopefully I haven't killed y'all or bored y'all too much talking about mud.
Yeah, that was great, Cade. Yeah, we have some questions, and one I'm going to call on Amber because she asked about the kind of history of it. And so if you want to go ahead and ask your question, Amber.
Talk about the first question I asked?
The one I just sent you. Yeah, I know you have a couple in there.
Oh, yeah. I know, like with that one picture you showed us, like with the 5 creeks going into the bay, you said it was from like the 70s. And I was just wondering if, like, with higher regulations and awareness brought to the issue, has it seemed to help? And is there a better, like, a picture of like the area now?
Yes. So, and it's probably make everybody sick going through the slides as fast. That we have seen improvement, absolutely. I don't have like a satellite picture of the bay from recently, although I'm sure we could get one that would look better than that. And of course, it depends on, when you have that major flooding like we did at Mardi Gras period, you're going to have, a lot muddier bay than you will during a drought. Bay can get really, really clear during major droughts. But the regulations, the Clean Water Act, have made some huge improvements. Recently, we've seen some of those regulations going the wrong way, which is unfortunate and a little bit disconcerting. But we've seen improvement from the amount of sediment going in. Now it's a matter of tracking down those contractors that still try to kind of get by because there's so few ADEM inspectors and so much ground to cover, especially in Baldwin County, and trying to figure out how to make sure they feel incentivized to do the right thing too. Because this is not, there's a couple pieces to it. One is sometimes they just don't know. Other times it's a matter of dollars versus the distance in it. What's the likelihood I even get caught? And if I get caught, what's the chance of a fine? And so we make it a lot more likely that somebody's going to see what's going on, and then we push on ADEM to take care of the site in an appropriate manner. If we can't get some work from if we call the contractor I'm not interested, I don't know who you are, go away, then that's our our next step. And so it has improved. Short answer, it's not where it needs to be to see major improvements in the grass beds and the oysters in the bay. We've still got to keep slowing down the amount of turbidity, amount of mud.
All right, and John had a question about current cases, if you want to ask John.
Yeah, I was kind of just wondering, because you were talking about all the old cases, so I was kind of wondering where you're seeing cases now popping up.
Yeah, so it's been dry the last several weeks, and whenever it's dry, that means we see less problems. But pretty much anywhere where there's a lot of growth, which means Fairhope and Daphne especially, and then West Mobile as well, and anywhere where there's major road construction, we typically see problems. And they kind of ebb and flow depending on when there's a major construction project, especially when it's near a waterway. Like I said, we just finally got some resolution on this issue that happened on the south side of Fairhope. It was right here somewhere. And so that was nice to see. And then we've been following a few out in West Mobile recently, but none of them have been the scale that that one is. So maybe speaking back to Amber's point, that indicates, kind of seeing a little less amount of cases that people are starting to see the light a little bit more, although, there's not a ton of development that's probably going to start today with everything going on. So better for worse, probably for worse.
All right, and then we had a couple questions on the toxins you see. So if you want to ask Boris your question.
Hey, Cade.
Hey man, what's up?
Hey, what's like the major toxin that you guys usually find with runoff?
So we don't do a lot of toxin testing of runoff, but I know from the literature that the most common, like in terms of toxins, the most common thing you see is metals. Sometimes they're naturally occurring in the soil. Sometimes if you're near a site where there's been contamination, they're, very persistent. So they stick around for a long, long time, and they get caught up in the soil because the soil, soil is not quite as plain as it seems. It's like a 12-year-old kid when you're playing in the sand pit or whatever. It has the capacity to adsorb, which means like chemically attach chemicals to it and hold them there, which is nice because it means that they won't go causing pollution other places. It's not nice if you want to do something to that soil, especially garden with it. But it is nice from the perspective that it can slow down some types of pollution. And then that's what you hear called it like brownfield sites. We're like, this site's not good, but as long as nobody digs up the soil, we're okay. Mobile Gas has a site like that. It's a little park. But a lot of times it's metals. We also can see some issues. What's becoming really common right now, if y'all been following, like if y'all seen dark waters, is PFOS and PFOS. If you hadn't heard of that, you can check those out. There's some pretty crazy stuff going on from like like 3M, people that make anything that's pretty much sticky, as well as anywhere near like an Air Force base where they have a lot of firefighting foam, and this stuff's in our water and our soil and that kind of stuff. So that's becoming a big concern as well.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, and real quick, Cade, you mentioned brownfields. I just wanted to give a little note of information to everybody. So the co-working space that all of you have been to for your interview, and where Larissa and I work, was actually a brownfield site. And so it was historically, it was I believe a car manufacturer or some type of automobile area. And so there was some pollution there, and the city has been working with partners on the site to get it fixed up. And thankfully, we've finally gotten to that point. So we're there, and they're trying to do some good by having that space be multifaceted with like the co-working and stuff like that. So a real life example that's close to home. Just thought I'd bring that up.
Nice. Yeah, that's cool.
All right, and then we had another question from Amber, which I just sent you, so you can read that, Amber.
Like when you were talking about like that creek with like all the sedimentation and changing from like the 4.5 feet to the 8 inches or whatever, I was wondering if like those landholders are able to sue like the contractors or the landholders of the properties upstream for the degradation of their property or the values from the construction.
So there have been, they can. There have been 2 lawsuits that I'm aware of about issues in Flat Creek. One was related to that construction, which was of Publix and associated developments. It wasn't necessarily the Publix, it was the people that built like the shopping center. And I don't remember the exact outcome of that one because that was before I came to Baykeeper, but I know there was a lawsuit from a group of citizens that were impacted by that. And this is a creek in Fairhope. If you go down US 98, you'll pass it right before you get into Fairhope, and a big kind of bridge goes over it, so you don't even know it's there. I love bridges that hide creeks and waterways away from our view so we can forget about them. That's irony. And there was a second lawsuit recently when they decided to build these apartments because they said in the initial planning they were this is like a 400-unit apartment they're building on the side of the creek. They were gonna do all these certain things, and then later on, it turned out that they weren't doing all those things from some drone photography that I took and some other folks that were related to it took. And so that once they figured out they weren't using this like diffuse way of making the runoff like be diffused out into a whole bunch of smaller streams, and they were using like a point source, they sued them about that. And actually, that the money they won from that, I think they started like a nonprofit with it over there to try to protect Fly Creek rather than like it didn't necessarily go to somebody's bank account. But Baykeeper wasn't part of either of those, although we did some work on both of them in terms of inspecting, investigating the sites and that kind of thing. So there's two pieces to that too, which is just to close that thought, and that's citizens can sue if their property is damaged. If they can show damages or nuisance or things like that, there's a whole, and I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know the details, but there's a whole bunch of different avenues they can pursue. But then there's also this type of suit called a Clean Water Act suit. This is what Baykeeper uses when there's pollution. And basically, when the Clean Water Act was written, the people that wrote it realized that sometimes the EPA or ADEM might not either see everything, or they might be politically like disincentivized from actually dealing with some of these issues. So they wrote this provision into the law in the Clean Water Act that basically says if a citizen sees pollution or is impacted or affected or hurt, injured by pollution, then they can file a suit for somebody that's breaking the Clean Water Act. And there's some kind of unique pieces to that. It's not about winning money or anything like that. So Baykeeper doesn't make money off these things, but it's just about stopping the pollution. And so it's a really interesting thing that's available. It's just real hard to do with construction stormwater sites because they're so temporary that by the time you get the evidence and get ready and decide that it rises to that level and you can't work with the people and they won't work with you, and then the site's almost all done and the judge is not going to be interested in being involved in that case. So again, that's our last resort. We're not just, I think we filed 8 in 23 years. We're not just rolling around filing lawsuits willy-nilly, but that is something that's available and is a kind of a important piece of our work when we have to have it.
That's pretty cool. So Austin had a question about volunteer, if you want to ask Austin.
All right, I wanted to ask, how much does Baykeeper rely on volunteer collection of data to monitor water quality across the area?
Yeah, so there's a program y'all are probably familiar with called Alabama Water Watch that does a fair amount of volunteer water quality monitoring. And we keep an eye on that water quality data. It's not like our data, or we don't. I am a trainer and will sometimes train people. And that SWAMP program I mentioned way back at the start with high schoolers, we train them. And that data can save us a lot of energy and time. Like we've been doing some bacteria source tracking in Magnolia Springs to try to figure out why there's high levels of bacteria and where it's coming from, and can look back at that Water Watch data to learn a little bit more about it. But a lot of times the Water Watch data is focused a bit more on the water chemistry, specifically pH, dissolved oxygen, and some other things that are interesting, but aren't necessarily relevant to our daily work. And the bacteria is a bit different than what we do, right? So they do it on like a Petri plate. If y'all have done that before, it's pretty interesting and it's informative. But we're talking about, and we've been working on being able to pilot a volunteer bacteriological water quality monitoring. And we have a lab in-house where we do a lot of bacteriological water monitoring, and being able to give people the supplies and the training to go out, take those and bring them in. And there's a group, Chattahoochee River Keeper, which is the same umbrella organization, Waterkeeper Alliance. They're in Atlanta on the Chattahoochee River, and they do this. They have a huge operation. They take like 180 samples a week in 3 offices. And so we're not ready for that by any stretch. I could only imagine pulling my hair out. And it's already starting to fall out. It doesn't need any help. But we do want to pilot a program like that. So right now, a little bit, short answer, a little bit. In the future, we're hoping to a lot more.
All right, to kind of close out the chat questions, I'm going to have Braylon ask his.
Oh yeah, so I was wondering what made you want to get into this field of work. Was it like because you were personally impacted by, events like this, or was it something else?
Yeah, thanks. I like that question. That's a fun question. I like all the questions, to be clear. So I grew up playing outside a lot. We've actually talked about this on our staff meeting yesterday. We kind of talked about who inspired you to be in this kind of line of work, or who led you into this line of work. And I had an older lady who would take us out hiking, me and a couple of friends of mine. We were real young, like 6, 7, 8, and take us to waterfalls. And I grew up in North Alabama, and there's bluffs and cliffs, and she was like fearless. It was pretty cool. And she was this little tiny old lady. And so she really got me into being outside. Like my parents were pretty outdoorsy. My dad gardened. So I played outside and was outside a lot and just loved being outside. And so when I got to college, I was in pre-med And I just couldn't see myself as much as I mean, like, especially right now, we all know doctors and nurses and everybody in that field, they're heroes. But I just was like, man, I'm going to be cooped up, like, with inside with people who are sick or dying all the time. And like, I wanted to do something that I knew I was helping and giving back, but I just couldn't see myself in that. So I started exploring, like, what could give me an avenue to be outside, but also feel like I'm making a difference. Like, I didn't just want to be like making money for a corporation or somebody else's pocketbook. I wanted to feel like I was making the world a better place. And so environmental science stuck out to me, and there were some really cool professors that I got to meet that really solidified that it was the right pathway. And I came down to the Gulf Coast, like Carrie mentioned, with my wife, and I was working at a shipyard doing environmental compliance, basically being like, you can't pour that paint there. No, that can't go there. You know, it was just like all day long. And literally, these guys it's good humor, but they would call my boss, oh hell, and they call me what now. So that was the schema at the shipyard. And so the position at Baykeeper opened up, and there were a lot of kind of different little sacrifices, that financial and otherwise, that I had to make. But it was just like so exciting and interesting to be able to like feel like every day when I came to work, the point was protect the Gulf Coast, help people have clean water, and work to make the world a little bit better in this little slice of the world. And so that is kind of my path in short. Of course, playing outside and backpacking for the Forest Service as part of the SCA is in there too, and was a really rewarding experience. But anyway.
Well, that's all of the questions I had. If anyone has a burning question that I didn't hit, you're welcome to ask it now. But otherwise, yeah, I can send it back to you, Carrie.
Oh, I did have another question if no one
Yeah,
else
go
had
ahead. Go ahead,
question.
Brian.
So with that being said, like, what do you think is like been like your biggest project that you've worked on that has, you know, made the biggest impact in a community that you're proud of?
Yeah, so we're working on a really big one right now that's still up in the air, and that's coal ash. And I would definitely tell y'all to check out mobilebaykeeper.org/coal ash and learn a little bit about that, and send a not within your SCA capacity, question mark, Carrie, but as your own personal capacity, send a letter to your elected officials and let them know that's a big deal. I don't think our AmeriCorps can do anything political, so I assume y'all are the same. But you can do anything that is legal in your personal capacity. But the biggest one that actually has concluded that I felt like made a big difference was in Daphne. We got word from some whistleblowers at Daphne Utilities, the wastewater treatment. They also do water and gas, and maybe electricity, I'm not sure. But the wastewater treatment was having some major issues, and they were not comfortable with what was going on and what they were being asked to do. They were upset, and they just weren't going to stand for it. One of them basically just left because they were being asked to hide in sewer spills and do things with treatment that weren't right. And so they came to us and told us they didn't feel like, you know, that this would be handled properly unless we were involved. And so they gave us this information, and we spent several months doing an investigation, interviewing a few other folks, that former and current staff members. We did some sampling. We flew in a plane to take some aerial photography, and eventually put together this like 50-something page investigative report that, again, if you need that late night reading to put you to sleep amidst your chronic anxiety, is there a word for that? Chronic anxiety? Somebody work on that for me. You can read that investigative report and the addendums. And it turned out that not only were they hiding sewer spills, but one of the things one of the employees told us was when the effluent, the water leaving the sewage treatment plant, looked bad, they were told not to test. And so it turned out, once we knew that and the state knew that and they knew everybody knew that, they had to do it right. And so the very next month, everything went from being good to having bacteria levels, quote, too numerous to count. That was their average monthly bacteria level, was too numerous to count. And that's not what you want to put. If you're a utility, you will do anything to try to be able to count them. So if they couldn't count them, you know, it's a shit ton, excuse the pun and the French. And that's 3 million gallons a day, average bacteria too numerous to count, going into Mobile Bay. I think if y'all can still see my screen, the effluent pipes look right about there. And that went on for 2 months. And then in the third month, they had 4,000% above the limit. And then by the fourth month, they had started to get things under control, thanks to our report, and then follow up with a lawsuit, a Clean Water Act lawsuit, like I mentioned earlier in the call. So that went on from like 2017 until the end of last year, I think. I can't keep up with dates anymore, y'all. I think I'm getting too old. But in any event, we were able to close it out whenever the hell it was recently. And they've made some major improvements in their treatment, in their staffing. The person that was kind of making everybody do all this stuff was let go. They have a new manager, and clean water going into Mobile Bay. So we were seeing, if you remember, all these pollution beach closures on the eastern shore due to bacteria, and a lot of those have dissipated now. And we think that was at least part of the problem. And so that was a really rewarding feeling to work on that for several years, and then now have, you know, much cleaner water coming out of there, and a good agreement with them to try to keep it that way. So
Awesome. That's awesome to hear, Cade, because I know when I started with Baykeeper back in 2017 for my AmeriCorps term is when all that was coming to fruition, and I'm really glad that that's wrapped up and ended in a
less
positive
poop in the bay is always good. Yeah.
Yes, I spared everyone that. I was like, this is some of the topics we could have covered, but I didn't think everybody wanted to listen about that for an hour.
I like to cover sewage for lunch meetings. That's always good. So
Exactly. Well, I put a couple links, the Daphne Utilities case and the coal ash, that you guys can check out on there. But also, I think Cody wanted to ask a question before we logged off. Cody, do you want to go ahead?
I think he's having
You
mic
can't hear?
problems.
Okay, I'll
Yeah.
ask it.
you can kind of mime it if you want. And
Does anybody know ASL? Okay, how often does Mobile Baykeeper deal with the runoff from crop or cattle farmers?
we don't do a lot with ag. There's a couple pieces to that. And the number one is there's just not a lot of rules and regulations that relate to ag. You know, there are a lot of organizations out there, like the NRDC and I'm trying to think of a few others, like Weeks Bay Foundation, for instance, that do things that are mostly voluntary to try to help cattle farmers and agricultural operations protect water quality. And most of those things relate to either buying or leasing land, right, so that they can back up from the creek a little bit, but not lose that amount of money, as well as excluding cattle from the creeks to keep livestock poop out. But there aren't a lot of rules, and the farm lobby is really big. And of course, especially at a time when everybody's panic buying, whatever they're panic buying, we know how important farmers are. So I'm not trying to demean farmers. A lot of them do a great job. But there are some serious pollution issues that relate to ag and livestock. But there's not a lot of easily enforceable rules. We do work to try to like get good educational materials out there. And then I mentioned earlier, we do some source tracking. So like that's testing for bacteria and then trying to figure out what the actual sources are. Whose poop is it, is what I tell people. And we can tell livestock from human, from pet. And so we haven't done a ton of that yet. We've put together a couple plans, but it's fairly expensive. But as we do that, if we find livestock as an issue in some of these watersheds, we'll definitely work with the local community to figure out how we can do some of those pieces, like exclusion fencing, which is basically keeping cows out of the creek, so their poop's not in the creek. And it has twofold. Most of these things are twofold because it can actually benefit the farmer. Because if your cow is in the creek, your cow is not eating grass, and therefore you're not making any money. Whole bunch of other things everybody can talk about with ethical considerations around that, as well as environmental considerations. But there are a lot of organizations that work on ag and livestock and big ag and CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations. And there's probably 30 Netflix documentaries you can watch and figure out how you feel about all that. But it's not a major focus for us. Good question. Thanks, man.
All right, well, we're about 5 minutes over. Is there anybody else that has like a question they really want to ask or any comments? Okay, awesome. Well, Cade, thank you for joining us. We were going to plan to do an Earth Day cleanup like we did last year with Mobile Baykeeper, so we were kind of sad we didn't get to do that, but at least you got to come on.
I think there's going to be a virtual cleanup that you can check out if y'all want. But in any event, thanks for having me. Absolutely here. Thanks y'all for everything y'all are doing.
Yeah, awesome. All right. Thanks, Cade.
Thanks, Cade. Bye.
Thanks, y'all. Have a great day.
You too.
Stay safe. I don't know how to hang up.